Republic, Senate, veto, and dictator. These terms dominate our modern headlines, yet they were forged over 2,000 years ago by a society attempting to govern itself. To understand how that system was built, you have to look past the marble monuments. 2,500 years ago, Rome was a fragile trading settlement huddled on this small bend in the Tiber River, built primarily so local farmers could survive constant invasions. Before they were a global superpower, they were a vulnerable society running an early, volatile experiment in human governance. That experiment started in 509 BC. The locals had just overthrown their tyrannical ruler, Tarquin the Proud, and they made a collective, sacred vow. No single man would ever hold absolute power over them again. To keep that promise, they designed a system intended to divide and balance authority. They called it a republic and built physical spaces like the Curia Julia seen here, where an elected body called the Senate would meet to debate laws rather than decree them by force. The Romans spent 5 centuries defining themselves by this hatred of kings, raising the question of how that same society eventually surrendered its democracy to autocrats and madmen. This diagram breaks down early Roman power. It was an unequal society. Wealthy patricians monopolized control at the top, while working-class plebeians were isolated below. Yet the military functioned incredibly well. Legions aggressively expanded from the Italian peninsula, absorbing neighboring territories. The ultimate display of this military capability was the Punic Wars. Over the course of 3 conflicts, Rome defeated their greatest North African rival, Carthage, burning the city to the ground, enslaving the survivors, and leaving it in ruins. But winning the Mediterranean was a poison pill. Conquered territory funneled massive amounts of gold, land, and enslaved people back into Rome. Because the system was already skewed toward the top, that wealth concentrated in the hands of a few elites, blowing inequality wide open. The domestic economy shattered. Poor citizens couldn't compete with massive estates running on free, enslaved labor. When a few politicians tried to pass reforms to redistribute land, the Senate had them assassinated in the streets. The political gridlock created a vulnerability, which Julius Caesar exploited. He bypassed the deadlocked Senate completely. By launching a brutal military campaign against the tribes of Gaul, modern-day France, he secured absolute loyalty from his soldiers and popularity with the common people. Terrified of his influence, the Senate ordered Caesar to give up his command. Instead, he marched his army across the Rubicon River into Rome. Following a bloody civil war, Caesar claimed total control, declaring himself dictator for life. A group of senators, including his close friend Brutus, stabbed Caesar to death on the Senate floor, claiming they were saving the Republic. The citizens, however, revolted against the assassins. The violent attempt to rescue democracy ended up burying it. Out of the resulting power vacuum emerged Caesar's adopted heir, Octavian. He took the title Augustus, becoming the first emperor, and established a 40-year period of relative peace known as the Pax Romana. This centralized autocratic control produced immediate results. Emperors poured wealth into massive public works, engineering marvels like the Colosseum, and complex road networks that connected an enormous society. Yet this model harbored a massive vulnerability. The stability of an empire spanning millions of people now rested entirely on the personal temperament, competence, and sanity of a single individual. For every capable builder, the system was just as likely to hand absolute power to unhinged sociopaths. Rulers like Caligula murdered citizens on a whim, while Emperor Nero emptied the state treasury on personal luxuries and executed anyone who questioned his actions. Despite the marble facades and grand arenas, the political core was rotting. Without a legal mechanism to vote out a bad leader, the only way to change the government was through violence. Political transitions were no longer determined by law, but by assassination. By the late 3rd century, Rome had simply grown too large to manage. Coordinating defenses from Britain to Syria using ancient communication methods was physically impossible, resulting in severe economic crises and constant rebellions along the borders. This map shows Emperor Diocletian's desperate administrative fix. He cleaved the territory in half, establishing a western zone governed from Rome or Milan and a distinct eastern zone. When Emperor Constantine later moved the capital to Constantinople, the empire's wealth, trade routes, and military focus shifted east. The western half was slowly starved of resources. Splitting the map didn't cure the underlying disease. It quarantined the wealthiest regions and left the impoverished west highly vulnerable to outside attacks. The breaking point finally arrived in 476 AD. Hollowed out by internal decay and depleted military funding, the Western Roman Empire collapsed entirely under the weight of Germanic invasions. The civilization's end contained a specific historical symmetry. Founded by a man named Romulus and turned into an empire by Augustus, the final Western emperor was a defeated teenager who carried both names, Romulus Augustus. The eastern half, known to us as the Byzantine Empire, survived for another 1,000 years, protected behind the massive stone defenses of the walls of Constantinople. The ruins of Rome stand as a 2,000-year cautionary tale. They prove that no society, no matter how rich or dominant, is guaranteed to survive forever. They can be dismantled from within by deep inequality, unchecked corruption, and the willing surrender of democracy for the illusion of autocratic safety.